Have you ever wondered what happens when a nation decides that standard diplomatic protocols are no longer enough? When the usual threats of economic sanctions or military posturing simply lose their sting? Look closely at what just unfolded. When the Iranian delegation boarded their flight, flying under the heavy and deliberate escort of Pakistani fighter jets, they did not just bring briefcases stuffed with policy papers. They brought a delegation under the codename Minabab. They carried onto that aircraft the personal belongings and photographs of 168 deceased children. They secured those items into 168 actual seats on that plane, every single one of them accompanying the living delegation all the way to the negotiation table. This is not just a diplomatic maneuver. This is a profound visual and psychological shockwave. Historically, we have seen nations use visual aids to force a geopolitical checkmate. Think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when American Ambassador Adlai Stevenson unveiled reconnaissance photos at the UN to expose Soviet missiles. That was a masterclass in the diplomacy of hard intelligence. But what we are witnessing today is something entirely different. It is the weaponization of raw, unfiltered grief. We are looking at a modern era of warfare, where precision-guided munitions, some costing upwards of $250,000 apiece, are routinely deployed by Western powers and their allies. The devastating reality on the ground is that in recent Middle Eastern urban conflict zones, children often account for nearly 40% of the tragic collateral damage. You cannot simply erase those grim statistics with a polished press briefing from Washington. By physically bringing these belongings to the table, the delegation has transformed a sterile political chessboard into a haunted altar. When Iran's Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, posted a picture of those seats on social media, he bypassed all standard diplomatic rhetoric and captioned it with a simple, devastating phrase, "My flight companions." In the echoing halls of international power, diplomatic pleasantries and bureaucratic jargon are usually like a thin, cheap coat of white paint, desperately applied by politicians to cover up the bloodstains on a concrete wall. But the blood always seeps through. How exactly does a Western diplomat look across the table and negotiate with the ghosts of 168 children? They thought they were walking into a room to negotiate geopolitical boundaries. But they are about to step into a moral tribunal where the loudest and most terrifying voices are the ones that have already been silenced. Now, place yourself in the shoes of the American delegation. Imagine sitting across that table, expecting a routine discussion on regional de-escalation, only to be confronted by the ghosts of the collateral damage you helped finance. The Iranian strategy here is brutally brilliant. They have bypassed the usual shouting matches over drone strikes, military installations, or assassinated leaders. Instead, they have dragged this geopolitical chess game down to the most agonizingly human level imaginable. They are pointing a finger directly at the American representatives, specifically targeting figures like J.D. Vance. Think about it. Here is a man who built his entire political brand on the narrative of climbing up from the forgotten working class. A father who knows exactly what a child's future means to a struggling family. The Iranian delegation is essentially looking him in the eye and asking, "Look at these 168 empty chairs. What exactly are you going to say to them? Can you calculate the compensation for 168 erased futures?" The United States consistently touts itself as the global beacon of human rights, freedom, and democracy. Yet, the cold, hard financial and military data tells a chillingly different story. Over recent months, Washington has authorized tens of billions of dollars in military aid to the region, including the expedited transfer of thousands of Mk-84 2,000-pound bombs. These are the very munitions designed to crack open military bunkers, but which inevitably turn crowded urban neighborhoods into dust. You cannot hide behind the fog of war, and you cannot dismiss these casualties as mere statistical anomalies or acceptable collateral damage, trying to wash away the moral stain of 168 dead children with rehearsed diplomatic talking points. is like trying to stop a massive hemorrhage with a band-aid made of $100 bills. It is completely futile, and it is deeply insulting to the basic conscience of the international community. The Iranian delegation has made it undeniably clear. They are not sitting there just as state diplomats. They are the living avatars of 168 shattered families. They are demanding a reckoning for what any objective observer would classify as war crimes. You can print endless billions of dollars to fund a foreign conflict, but you cannot print a single ounce of moral authority once you have bought it with the blood of the innocent. So, what happens if the United States sits at that negotiation table and chooses to look right through those 168 empty chairs? What happens if they dismiss this profound grief as a mere theatrical stunt? I will tell you exactly what happens. We will witness the absolute, irreversible collapse of the American moral illusion. For decades, Washington has operated on a very specific and carefully curated global narrative. The entire premise of American hegemony is built on the idea that its power is fundamentally righteous, that it serves as the ultimate defender of human life and liberty. But look around. The world is watching this delegation. And I mean the entire world. If you look at the latest geopolitical tracking data, the approval rating of American leadership across the so-called Global South has experienced a catastrophic free fall. In key Middle Eastern, African, and Latin American nations, trust in the United States-led international order has plummeted to historic lows. In some strategic regions, dropping well below 20%. Why is this happening? Because of moments exactly like this. The Global South is no longer blindly listening to what American diplomats say. They are watching what American policies actually do. When Parliament Speaker Kolobaf posted that devastating photo with the simple words, "My flight companions," it was not just a diplomatic jab at Washington. It was an unfiltered broadcast to the conscience of the entire globe. It bypassed all media spin and forced every single person to look at that image and ask the most uncomfortable question of our modern era. Why are children paying the ultimate price to maintain a geopolitical world order? The resulting public relations pressure is simply insurmountable. You cannot hire a crisis management firm to spin this. American diplomatic ideology right now is like a towering Hollywood movie set. It looks imposing and magnificent from the front, but the moment you walk around to the back, you realize it is entirely hollow, just cheap wood propped up by sandbags. If the United States delegation ignores the memory of those children to secure a tactical win, they are proving to the rest of the planet that American morality is completely conditional. They will prove that their highest ideals are nothing more than a convenient fiction. And mark my words, an empire can survive a massive economic recession, and it can even survive a devastating military defeat, but it will never survive the total bankruptcy of its own conscience. Recently, Donald Trump confidently declared that Iran essentially has a weak hand, that aside from a short-term squeeze on the Strait of Hormuz, they have absolutely no cards left to play. This is not just a geopolitical miscalculation. It is the breathtaking arrogance of a politician who fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the game being played. He is looking at the board as if it is a poker table where the United States holds all the economic and military chips. But what Washington fails to grasp is that when you push a nation to the point where its defining collective memory is a flight cabin filled with the photographs of dead children, they are no longer playing with chips. They are holding a detonator. Let us briefly unpack this supposed short-term squeeze on the Strait of Hormuz that politicians so casually dismiss. We are not talking about a minor maritime traffic jam. We are talking about the most critical, hypersensitive geopolitical choke point on the entire planet. Over 20 million barrels of oil flow through that narrow 33-mile wide waterway every single day. That is roughly 20% of the world's total liquid fuel consumption. If a grieving, cornered nation decides to completely blockade and mine that strait, global markets would not just stumble, they would break. we would be looking at crude oil prices instantly surging past $200 a barrel. The ensuing hyperinflation would paralyze the global supply chain, freeze industrial manufacturing, and act as a catastrophic wrecking ball to the petrodollar system that props up the American economy. Yet, certain politicians act as if this is merely a bluff they can confidently call. This brings us to a terrifying psychological threshold. Years ago, Vladimir Putin articulated a chilling doctrine when discussing nuclear deterrence. He asked, "Why do we need a world if Russia is not in it?" That is exactly the precipice we are standing on right now. If the international community, led by the United States, chooses to look past the tragedy of those 168 children and treat them as invisible, then why should this grieving nation care about the stability of your international order? If the world refuses to give them justice, they have absolutely no incentive to give the world peace. To stand comfortably behind an ocean and a massive military umbrella, refusing to acknowledge your own catastrophic moral failures, and then call your adversary cowards. That is the ultimate pathetic projection. Pathetic project surprised when they finally decide to burn the entire table to the ground. We are witnessing a paradigm shift in how international leverage is wielded. But this event proves that the ultimate currency in geopolitics is not just the dollar, and it certainly is not the aircraft carrier. It is the raw, undeniable weight of human survival and collective memory. When a nation successfully weaponizes its deepest grief and entirely strips away its fear of further loss, all of Washington's conventional threats, economic sanctions, and carrier strike groups simply become meaningless background noise. We are watching a grieving delegation hold up a shatterproof mirror to the architects of modern warfare, forcing them to look at the horrifying, blood-soaked reflection of their own foreign policies. So, I leave you with this question to ponder. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. When the geopolitical dust finally settles decades from now, will history remember the politicians in their expensive tailored suits who sat around drafting empty treaties, or will it remember the 168 silent companions who watched them do it? Subscribe, share this video, and stay awake, because the rules of the global game have just been permanently rewritten.